The New Model Army oversaw one of the most momentous periods in British history, raised from the fires of an idealised republic to crush tyranny and the last threads of monarchical rule. Today we discuss the immensely well-disciplined, trained and successful army, and how Britain was bathed in royalist blood. Firstly, let's give some background context prior to the establishment of the New Model Army. Founded in 1641, the previous three wars had seen the English kingdom embroiled in the fires of civil war between the parliamentarians and the royalists, the reasons for which aren't entirely simple, but the ruling monarch Charles I had been acting a bit tyrannical and Parliament didn't like that. The previous wars with Scotland and the rebellion in Ireland in 1641 had left the king, well, dry with funds. With Parliament refusing to raise taxes without concessions or provide the funds required, he effectively dissolved the Parliament in anger.
This Parliament is, by my authority, terminated, dissolved.
Moreover, his attempted arrest of 5 specific members of Parliament forcefully plunged the country into a civil war.
Your Majesty! Are you aware that by your action in this House today, you may have pushed this nation to the brink of civil war?
Now, the overall reason for the establishment of the parliamentarian New Model Army is that the old system of recruiting and fighting was ineffective in long-term warfare. Many soldiers had simply been called up as a part of local militias, and with little training, there was not much desire to travel far from home to fight. One of the first examples of military failure faced was the defeat at the Battle of Roundway Down on July 13, 1643, in which the parliamentarians were thoroughly defeated by an inferior royalist force, seeing the deaths of around 6,000 and the imprisonment of 1,200 further. The Battle of Edge Hill was the first major battle for parliamentarian forces. It should have been a decisive defeat, but the royalists suffered inexperience and were eventually routed and pushed back by the combined horse and foot of the Earl of Essex. After this, the Earl would retreat forces back to London, followed by another attack by Prince Rupert's cavalry, which eventually saw a minimal defeat of the parliamentarian forces. The Battle of Turnham Green, which was a strategical victory for the parliamentarians, saw the town sacked, which forced people out of London and into the cause of the Parliament. These battles had shown by 1643 that both sides were fully committed to the idea of full warfare. It is only possible ending with a full-scale defeat. Furthermore, it highlighted that the parliamentarians weren't going to win through battles, but through conquest of territory, monopoly on resources, the treasury, military enhancement and reform. After all, the City of London and the Treasury, again, were both in the hands of Parliament. An example of the strategy being employed was the seizure of gunpowder at Reading, which was the largest store for the Royal Army at the time. Now, this is where the issue of conscription and men comes revolving round. Many on both sides were more than willing to fight for their local counties and protect their homes and firesides, but were unwilling to join any large-scale field army which could be manoeuvred around the country. This would leave cities besieged or armies under attack, unable to effectively get reinforcements from cooperating militias in other counties. However, with these setbacks, the parliamentarians were going stronger by the weeks, with the victory at Winsby under the Earl of Manchester, Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell only furthered the doubt of the victory suffered by the royalist cause. This turned both sides into negotiations with outside powers, the parliamentarians with the Scots in fear of another bishops' war, and the royalists with the Irish Catholics. From these negotiations, the parliamentarians would receive 18,000 infantry, 2,000 cavalry and 1,000 dragoons and an ordnance train. In mid-1644, after the Battle of Cropredy Bridge, and the 27th of October, the Battle of Newbury, in which Charles led his men on the field personally, the parliamentarians were defeated despite having logistical and strategic upper hand. Moreover, the bloody victory at Marston Moor began to show cracks in the parliamentarian army, which seems to have spun around political divide and, well, a decline in popularity of the movement. Moreover, the angst against Cromwell and the plot to have him removed from positions of leadership permanently by the Earl of Essex only furthered the divided cause. If the army be not put into another method and the war more vigorously prosecuted, the people can bear the war no longer and will enforce you to a dishonourable peace. With the heads of army dissatisfied and the Parliament unable to come up with a solution to the growing issue of discontent, the Commons had effectively allowed the army to disintegrate itself in the creation of a new model army. Eventually the sanctioning of an army was created by Sir General Thomas Fairfax with 22,000 men besides officers. All officers and soldiers were required to take an oath to Parliament, and the officers were selected from a list of appointed names, rather than members of the Parliament or men with titles being granted men to command. With a stronger force that was no longer intensely politically divided, the army could act more cohesive than before. Moreover, the new model army allowed recruitment and movement of troops from home counties, effectively allowing units to be raised wherever they were needed and travelled around the country. This was shunned by the House of Lords, but it was said to them that if they were not in favour of elements that would aid the kingdom, then their opinion was not going to be needed. Furthermore, the exclusion of Scottish officers from the army diminished the nation's role in English affairs. This is a simplified version of events. Now, following years can only be labelled as years of victory. Despite initial setbacks with the Royalists seizing Leicester without so much as a hand raised against them, the Parliament would give General Fairfax a free hand that he needed to guide the war. Ultimately, with the position of Lieutenant General of Cavalry being unfulfilled and later held by Oliver Cromwell, following the Battle of Naseby, and it was a brilliant success that saw less than 500 dead and over 5,000 Royalist soldiers killed, captured or wounded during the course of the engagement. The following Southwest campaign was a success, with the decisive battles at Torrington being another crucial victory for the Parliamentarians. Furthermore, with victories at Stow-on-the-Wold, the Third Siege of Oxford, and the Second Battle of Worcester, effectively crippled the Royalist forces while the Parliamentarians grew stronger and stronger. There would be no major battles left for the First English Civil War between the opposing forces, ending the First Civil War. During the Second English Civil War, however, between February and August of 1648, a Scottish army invaded England to liberate Charles from his hiding on the Isle of Wight. Simultaneously, Royalists resurfaced in many isolated places, notably in Kent and Essex. The Battle of Preston in 1648, the new model army triumphed over combined Scots and English rebels, both in the south under Fairfax and in the north under Cromwell. The Civil War would eventually fully end in 1649 with the death of King Charles I after public trial, an episode which we shall cover later on. The Lord General was something akin to a Commander-in-Chief. Held by Thomas Fairfax throughout the course of the war, it was seen to have jostled power between Parliament and the army. Eventually he would resign his command due to increasing political fanaticism for Cromwell. The Lieutenant General of Branch was of French origin, but originally commanded a specific branch of troops on the field. Respectively, the Commander-in-Chief was assisted by a Lieutenant General of Horse, Ordnance and Foot, which would be cavalry, artillery and infantry. There may also be Commissary Generals who dictated supplies and food. The Sergeant Major General, or known today as the Major General, was a senior commander on the battlefield with smaller units under their command. Divisions and corps had not yet been developed for warfare. They would have something similar to a brigade level command. The colonel held command over a regiment at full strength of around 1,200 soldiers on the battlefield. This was specifically for infantry. Regimental sizes would change depending on the soldiers within. Cavalry regiments would have between 6 to 8 companies of 60 to 80 riders. The lieutenant colonel would hold second in command position of a regiment and assist in the commanding of the 10 or so companies within. The sergeant major was originally the name for the major and would hold company command within the regiment, usually of around 200 men under their command. This would change depending on the regiment, and they would also assist the senior officers. The captain would hold company command within a regiment, usually with around 100 to 160 men under their command. The lieutenant would hold command over the sergeant and the ensign within the regiment. The ensign may be considered lower than a lieutenant, or a lieutenant in fact, but would have responsibility for protecting the regimental colours. The lieutenant may also hold command over a small unit of men. The sergeant would hold command over and discipline of a small unit of soldiers on the battlefield, but would also be responsible for the drilling, mess and other necessities of that unit of men. The corporal would assist the sergeant in his responsibilities while also holding command over another smaller unit of men. The private was the lowest ranking soldier within the new model army. It would be higher than a recruit or volunteer and would usually be given to more adept soldiers. The new model army was eventually so powerful that it could directly challenge any issue given by the Parliament. Moreover, they also sought to arrest various Presbyterian members of Parliament and to, well, challenge the arrears in their pay. They also sought to arrest various other members for various other reasons, but the army was effectively becoming more of a political issue rather than a military one, as various groups jostled for power within its commanding council. Eventually, the Commander-in-Chief Fairfax resigned over refusing to take command of an army that had become far too fanaticised for the country's good. Cromwell eventually took power and pursued the invasion of Scotland and Ireland. The new Commonwealth under Cromwell would then be divided into 12 districts under the command of a Sergeant Major General, with Cromwell as its commander and Lord Protector. Following his death in 1658, his son would take power, but then the army was eventually be disbanded with the restoration of Charles II on the throne, thus ending the Republic, ending the dictatorship, and ending the years of conflict on the British Isles, and ending the new model army. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video as much as I enjoyed making it. It's been a little while since I've uploaded something, but I thought I'd work hard to get this one out. It's been a very tough month for me, so I'm sort of just getting back on my horse now, but I really appreciate the people who stick around, watch my content, or even go back to watch my old content. I really do appreciate that, and this channel is still growing despite my inactivity, so I'm really thankful for that. And everyone who makes it till the end, thank you again. But I'll see you in the next video.